much hope. Can I pick up, Mike, first of all? You told us that fuel consumption had come down by 70%, noise had come down by 90% since the dawn of the jet age. You showed us lots of fabulous plans for the long term. We're focused today on what can be done in the next decade, the next maybe 15 years, before a new runway comes on stream. How much potential within that 10 or 15 years is there for further gains? Or are we now stuck with the current fleet?
I think there's tremendous potential in the near term for gains beyond what we have today. We will be, in the next 2 to 3 years, introducing the new version of the 737 MAX. A year after that, the 787-10. A year after that, the 777-9X. And then 2 years later, the 777-8X. So we've got a family of new airplanes that are all rolling out over the course of the next 5 years that will all be around 15 to 20% more fuel efficient than the airplanes that they're replacing. And they'll have better community noise performance as well. So I think in the near term, there's a tremendous room for improvement with airplanes that are coming out in the near term. But then in addition, many of the things that Paul described can be accomplished with minor changes to the airplanes today. Small changes in avionics equipage on the airplanes will allow them to play in the airspace and work more efficiently together. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the near term.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman at the back. Just tell us who you are before you ask a question.
Jock Low, ex-British Airways. I mean, no one is a bigger fan of Boeing than I am, and I've worked with them for 30 years. But I had this debate with Alan Mullally, and it's still going on. There was a major, and I think crucial, omission from your presentation. You did nothing about what you're doing with aeroplanes in the 20 miles to 3 mile sector. Still put gear down, none of it streamlined. You still use flaps to slow down instead of speed brakes on top of the wing. You still don't, and operational procedures do steeper, and from your product guidelines, steeper intermediate approaches. And similarly with Paul, there's no, you haven't overlaid a population graph on underneath your radar. So our biggest issue in Europe, and I would suggest now in a lot of America, and increasingly it will be so in the Far East, is approach noise. Not just by clever flight paths, but by what noise the aeroplane makes. And if I can give you the example, I had this debate with Alan Mullally many times. He was so proud that if you actually stopped the engines on a 777, the approach noise would be the same, to which my response was, well, that shows how damn noisy your airframe is. So can you just add that to your list, please, in the future?
Absolutely. It does go to show you that the airframe has gotten quieter as well as the engines come down. As you drain the swamp, you know, the stumps stick out.
Yeah, but deliberately to do it.
Yeah.
But
and
deliberately to do it.
And the one thing that I did fail to mention as I was describing some of the technologies that were involved in testing are steeper approaches and looking at the from top of descent to the runway end, and not just from top of descent to the runway end, but the final approach segment at steeper approaches as well. With the eco demonstrator, we did a number of approaches, not just with a 3 or 3.5, but 4 and 5 degree glide paths as well. So that's a point that's well taken.
But if you have steeper descents, steeper ascents, are you not concentrating the noise to disproportionately affect a smaller number of people?
No, the idea with steeper descents is that you're holding the airplane away from people for longer. And so you maintain your altitude for a longer period of time, and then when you begin your final descent path, you're on a steeper approach. And so at any point, compared to a less or a normal approach, the airplane is further from the ground. So your descent is a shorter segment over the ground. It's further from the ground, and there's a commensurate reduction in community noise as well.
But the people who live at Charlwood near Gatwick, the people who live at Sipson near Heathrow, they're stuffed.
Well, the airplanes will still be, that's a really good point. If you live close to an airport, there's going to be noise unless we stop flying in there. And if the nation wants to participate in the continued economic growth around the world that air transportation brings, then the nation has to change how it approaches how you get in and out of an airport. There are things that everything that we do helps reduce the noise that an airplane generates. We have more efficient aerodynamics. Each successive family of airplanes is more efficient from an aerodynamic standpoint and more efficient from an engine perspective, but there will always be noise. Each airplane is less noisy than the airplane before. As we work with air traffic service providers to provide more efficient operations, the operations will be quieter than they were before, but there will always be some noise involved. And if you have more aviation, then there will be the potential for more noise, but you have to keep reducing the amount. Okay. All I can say is that it's a part of growth, and there are priority decisions that have to be made.
Okay. Gentleman across there, then lady on the side there. Microphone's coming around towards you now. Keep it to a question rather than a statement or a lecture.
Yes, it is a question, and my name's Rod MacDonald, and the question very much relates to what Jock Lowe was saying just now. You showed us the very impressive noise reduction figures since the 60s, and you showed us the noise footprint. I believe the noise footprint that you showed us is actually a takeoff footprint. It is not a landing footprint. Can you tell us what the noise reduction figures are on landing rather than on takeoff? Because that's what interests most of us more than takeoff.
I do not have off the top of my head the figures for the arrivals. Typically, the most constraining noise requirements have been departure noise, and so those are the charts that I demonstrated. And I don't have the number for arrivals off the top of my head.
Okay. Lady there? Yes, no?
Yes, no, I'm coming, sorry. Sally Pavey, Cagney, Communities Against Gatwick Noise and Emissions. Firstly, probably an observation, looking at your first slide, Paul, of the airspace. Is this the right place to put any new runways with such busy skies? But the question is, you say that the trials have affected fewer people because of the holding stacks. The pilots call it dancing across the gardens of England. Aren't you actually inflicting more noise on more new people by doing the approach you're doing? And the second point is, what is your definition of respite, please?
Okay, to answer the first one, hopefully the X-Man video that we showed, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to stream aircraft and slow them up over a longer period of time to the point that they don't end up holding, or I think what you're referring to is lateral holding, where you end up doing big S's around Kent instead of going around in circles. In some respects, we're trying to eliminate all of that, and that's the purpose of X-Man, where you still fly the most optimum routes, but we can restrict your speed to get you to arrive at a target time and ultimately your sequence. And this is other areas in the States. They do it, if you're going into LA, you might pick up a speed restriction with 3 hours to go going into LA so that they can get an optimum stream coming in from the east. So hopefully, no, there won't be the skipping across the gardens of England. In terms of respite, we've done some trials where and one of them that we did last year was we created blocks of airspace between the hours of 11 o'clock and 6 in the morning. And the air traffic controllers were told that actually they had to position their flights. This was going into Heathrow. They had to position their flights and they couldn't go in these blocks of airspace. The following week, we actually moved the blocks 3 miles to the north, and so people that had respite that week now had the aircraft and vice versa. And so you ended up with some people potentially having more aircraft one week, but actually having no aircraft the next week. But it was an interesting thing, and I'm not sure my slide brought it out. We announced that we were going to introduce those trials, and they were going to go live on I think the date was the 29th of June last year. and one of our airspace maps wasn't correctly implemented. And so we made a decision to delay for 3 days while we updated the map. Our noise complaints in 3 days before we introduced the trial went up by about 10%. Now, we hadn't done anything different from an air traffic point of view. We just told people we were going to do something different. But just the very fact that people thought something different was happening, they became sensitized to aircraft over the top of them. And so respite, I think, is something that we can look at. It's something that, yes, we can introduce. Clearly, there's a trade-off with all the other, whether that's capacity, whether that's efficiency. Aircraft might fly actually longer routes and burn slightly more fuel in order to avoid the respite areas. But I still think there's a challenge there engaging with the local community, because even when we announced we were going to change something but then delayed doing it, people's perception was in the first 3 days the noise went up by a huge amount, when in reality nothing had actually changed. So I think there's a challenge there to try and communicate and find that balance.
So following on from that, you talked about point merge earlier on for London City.
Yeah.
Could that work at Gatwick? Could that work at Heathrow?
Yes, so we have the airspace designs, and one of the later phases that we talked about chunking it down into phases, but one of the later phases introduces point merge for Gatwick, and the designs for point merge is it's over the English Channel to try and pull away from the land mass.
Okay, got a couple of minutes only. There's a question there. Sorry, did you want to come back very, very briefly?
Just very briefly, I'm sorry. What evidence do you have that there is less noise than having them in holding stacks? Because the lowest point of a holding stack is 7,000 feet, whereas you're slowing them and bringing them down as you dance across the countryside. So what evidence do you have that you aren't impacting more new people with more noise?
Yeah, so that didn't come out. So we're not going to bring them down lower. So the aircraft will remain higher for longer and fly a continuous descent. So rather than bring them in and bring them down, they would stay high for longer. And it comes back to the point that Mike was making. Obviously, the higher the aircraft, hopefully the less noise impact on the ground. So they would stay higher.
Okay, question here.
Yeah, hi, it's Robert Wall. I'm a reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Questions for Mike. It's a bit about, you talked about laminar flow issues, and I'm just wondering what your view on that now is. When you guys explored it, you played around with it a bit, and now I think have made some decisions not to implement it quite so quickly. So do you think that was just a research exercise that took you down somewhere and then it didn't prove so promising? Is it something you would look to go back to? And do you have, if that doesn't work out, do you have something you're looking at that could give you similar efficiency gains, but along a different technology stream?
Yeah, sure. There's a misperception that I'd like to clear up if I could. And there's two forms of laminar flow that have been in the press recently related to Boeing airplanes. One is the recent series of testing that we've just completed on the eco demonstrator regarding natural laminar flow, which is purely a way of manufacturing and maintaining an airfoil shape such that the flow remains attached for longer than it would otherwise, creating less drag. A second method, which we've incorporated on the 787-9, is hybrid laminar flow control, or HLFC, which uses a method of pulling the boundary layer off the surface of the airfoil so that the flow can remain attached. Rather than natural, which is purely passive, we use a special technique to remove the boundary layer. And that method was introduced in the 787-9, and it's proved very effective on the 787-9. It had been considered for the design of the 777X, and we removed it from the design of the 777X because it wasn't required. The 777X was meeting all of its targets for aerodynamic efficiency and fuel burn efficiency, and there was no longer the need to provide the added benefit that this laminar flow control provides, because while it provides benefit, it also comes at a cost. It's equipment that has to go on the airplane. There's fuel burn associated with the weight of the equipment. It costs more to manufacture. And so it's a tool in the toolkit. And anytime you do an airplane design, you always look at a problem to solve and what's the best tool in the toolkit to solve it. As the 777X design evolved, we found that tool of hybrid laminar flow was no longer the best tool to solve a problem on the 777X, yet it still remains the best tool on the 787-9. So it's not a step away from laminar flow. It's just recognizing that we developed a technology. It's a practical technology on one airplane type. On another airplane type where the airfoil is bigger, it might not have been the same might not have resulted in the same level of efficiency given the cost. It's often perceived as we're taking a step back, but it's not. We just said for this one airplane type, it's not necessarily the right tool in the toolkit.
I've got about 10 more questions. We're not going to get through them all. So with the last literally 2 or 3 minutes, there's people with their hands up. Let's do one, but let's do two if they're quick.
Thanks. Richard Dilks from London first. Paul from NATS, you mentioned phase 2 of LAMP. I wonder if you could expand on what phase 2 of LAMP is. And I appreciate you said that capacity was only one possible positive out of LAMP, but is there any sense of what the capacity gain is for South East England airspace out of LAMP?
I think, so it's hard to hear the question, but I think it was what is in phase 2 and the benefits from LAMP?
The capacity benefits from LAMP, yep.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so in phase 2, we're looking to, we have phase 1A, which is London City, phase 1B, which is airspace at higher levels, 20,000 feet or so over London. And then phase 2 will be Heathrow and Stansted and Luton. 2A is Heathrow, 2B is Luton and Stansted. And by the time we finished, and then Gatwick gets plugged in at the back end of that. So by the time we finished, we will have covered the whole of South East England. In terms of benefits, we're designing the airspace so that we have enough capacity to service all demand through to 2025. That's one of the requirements of the design. And when we're doing the simulations and everything else, we're putting forward traffic simulations, bearing in mind that some of the traffic growth, we're having to use high, medium forecasts, low forecasts, and make a judgment in terms of how we think it's going to pan out. But if we get the airspace design right, which I'm very confident we will, we should be able to meet demand through to 2025.
Okay, that wasn't short, so let's do a very, very quick last one.
Yes, okay, I'll be very quick. Rod McDonald from Runways UK. Question for Nats. I realise that the integration of the UK, Ireland and European airspaces has been very complex. However, a lot of the planes arriving into that space are arriving from many thousands of miles away, and you're controlling their speed for 350 miles. Surely it would be a good idea to control their speed for several thousand miles, and by controlling their speed through that length of time, they're going to reduce the amount of fuel they're using, as well as ease the approaches and get rid of stacking.
I couldn't agree more, and I think the video showed that we started at about 150 miles up to UK airspace. We've now extended that over the last 12 months. We're now at 350. The plan's to go to 550, and then ultimately build on that so that you bring more and more air traffic partners in, more and more countries in. One of the things you have to bear in mind, though, is that as you push out towards the west, aircraft are coming across the ocean on procedural tracks, and so they're given a speed to fly to ensure that maintain their 10-minute separation from the aircraft in front or the aircraft behind. We need to make sure that we don't manipulate that aircraft speed to optimise the Heathrow sequence, but then mess up the sequence we've set up when they're coming across the Atlantic Ocean. So, and it's the same when you push out down towards the southeast of Europe. In solving Heathrow's problem, what we've got to make sure is that we don't create another problem from an air traffic point of view. You can turn aircraft left and right, you can climb and descend them, and you can speed them. They're the three tools you've really got to make aircraft avoid each other in a very busy piece of airspace. If there's an air traffic controller 1,000 miles away dictating what happens to this aircraft's speed, it may not suit you in terms of your plan. So that's why I said earlier about trying to coordinate all those moving parts to make sure that we solve our problem but don't create 3 or 4 other problems for our European partners. But you're absolutely right. We've rolled it out to 350. The next phase is 550, and then so on.
Thank you.